All right, welcome back everyone to the Unseen Wisdom. Today we're going to be diving into a story that's making waves across the internet, and it's all about TikTok and this potential US ban and the unexpected rise of another social media platform, and it's a Chinese one, RedNote. And what we're seeing is pretty wild. Instead of just like abandoning Chinese-owned platforms altogether, American users are actually flocking to one, even with a ban on the horizon. So like, what's the deal here? I mean, are people just less concerned about data privacy all of a sudden, or what's going on?
It's a really interesting situation for sure. We've got this whole widespread anxiety about TikTok potentially sharing user data with the Chinese government. So people are like, okay, I'm going to find alternatives. But instead of going to, an American-owned app, they're choosing RedNote, which is another Chinese platform.
Right, right.
It's a little ironic, don't you think?
It really is, yeah. I mean, it's like you're so worried about one, and then you just run straight to another. So let's break down this whole TikTok ban situation first. Like, what exactly is going on, and what are the concerns driving it?
So there's this huge concern about TikTok's parent company, ByteDance, potentially handing over user data to the Chinese government. And this fear is a major driver behind the potential ban. It's definitely causing people to look for other platforms. But here's the thing.
Okay.
TikTok's data is actually already stored in Texas.
So there's already like a degree of separation from like ByteDance in China. Does that even actually make a difference?
It's a great question. I mean, it does suggest a level of independence, but I think that concern still remains, right? Like, data can be accessed remotely regardless of where it's physically stored. And, laws can change, and ultimately who controls that data in the end?
Yeah.
It's still a big question.
So even with that being in place, it's not like a guaranteed safeguard, is it?
Exactly. And then
It's still kind of
to make it even more complicated. Yeah. We don't really know how this potential ban will impact other apps that are owned by ByteDance, like Lemonade, which is actually gaining popularity here.
right.
So it really begs the question, is this, a targeted move against TikTok specifically? Or is this something broader, like a push against, Chinese-owned platforms in general?
Okay, so there's a lot of uncertainty then surrounding this ban and its implications. But meanwhile, RedNote is surging in popularity.
Yeah.
It's like everyone jumped ship and just happened to land in, ironically, like the same place.
Yeah. It's been pretty dramatic. I mean, it shot to the top of the download charts, on Apple and Google app stores here in the US, and we've seen this huge influx, about 700,000 new users in just like 2 days.
Yeah.
And it really seems like a lot of them are coming from TikTok.
Wow. But isn't that a bit strange? Like people are worried about data privacy on one Chinese platform and then they just go to another. I mean, is this just about like a lack of awareness or is there something else at play here?
I mean, you would think people would be a little bit more cautious, right? But there's this real lack of information about RedNote. And I think specifically, when it comes to their data practices and their relationship with the Chinese government, we just don't know how they handle user info compared to, say, TikTok.
Yeah, that's kind of unnerving. I mean, you'd think that, with all the attention on data privacy, users would be, I don't know, more discerning about where their information's going.
And there's another layer to it. I mean, RedNote's terms of service and their user agreements are often not even in English.
Wait, so American users are potentially agreeing to things that they can't even understand. That seems like a recipe for disaster.
Yeah, I mean, it really highlights the risks involved, when there's just this lack of transparency. And it begs the question, are we truly becoming more comfortable sharing our data with foreign companies? Or are we just not aware of the risks?
Right. I think it's really a little bit of both, honestly. I think, a lot of us just click agree on those terms of service without even reading them, right? But maybe this situation is kind of forcing us to confront those choices a bit more directly. It's not just about, convenience anymore. It's about understanding the implications of what we agree to in a world where, data is such a valuable commodity.
Absolutely, yeah. And this leads to another interesting aspect of this whole RedNote thing, which is, the cultural exchange that's actually happening. And despite these anxieties about data privacy, there's this surprising positive side. We've seen accounts of American users on RedNote who are having really positive interactions with Chinese users. They're breaking down stereotypes, building connections, and even challenging their own preconceived notions about China.
This is where things get really interesting, because I read about a user who described themselves as being, radicalized in a positive way by their experience on RedNote. What stood out to them? And how did it actually change their perspective.
Yeah, and their experience wasn't really about political ideology, it was about human connection. What really stood out was the warmth and the sense of community that they found on a RedNote. They talked about constantly being invited to join live streams, share meals virtually, even learn calligraphy together. And it was that genuine human connection that really challenged their previous perceptions of Chinese people and culture.
So it's pretty amazing how these digital platforms can actually facilitate like real human connection,
Yeah.
despite geographical and cultural barriers.
Yeah.
But it also makes you wonder how much of our perception of China is shaped by what we see in the media, which often focuses on political tensions and differences.
That's a good point. I mean, this user even mentioned having lived in China for 2 years and being surprised by, the advanced technology, the feeling of safety, and their overall quality of life.
Yeah.
And it just completely contradicted, the often negative portrayal of China that's so common, I think, in Western media.
Yeah. It's a really stark reminder that there's many sides to every story, and personal experiences can completely change our perceptions.
Yeah.
But it's not all serious cultural exchange,
Yeah.
right? Like I also came across this story about an American user who was bombarded with messages from gay Chinese men.
Oh, yeah. That story is hilarious. I mean,
Yeah.
it highlights just the diverse range of interactions and experiences that people are having on RedNote,
Yeah.
It's like this glimpse into the reality of life in China that you wouldn't necessarily get from mainstream news outlets. And, it shows that despite government censorship, there's this vibrant and active LGBTQ plus community there.
It's like a window into a culture that we often really misunderstand, and it's all happening through a social media.
Yeah, and it really highlights the power of these platforms to connect people in these unexpected ways and to challenge our assumptions about the world. But it also brings up this really crucial question. If users are turning to foreign platforms like this, like, what does it mean for the future of American social media companies?
Yeah, I mean, it's a big question, right? Like if users are, embracing these foreign platforms, are American companies going to start losing their grip,
Yeah.
and will they adapt, or are we going to see like a whole new landscape emerge in social media?
Yeah, it's definitely like a challenge, I think, for companies like Meta, who are already kind of struggling to keep up with TikTok. And this RedNote situation could, really shake things up even more. Are we going to see them, try and compete by offering more transparency, more control over data, or, even just completely new features? Like, what can they even do at this point?
Right. It's going to be interesting to see how they respond. Like, will they be able to innovate and win back users, or will they just keep losing ground to these foreign competitors? It's a big question mark right now. And it's not even just about competition, right? This whole situation like raises these fundamental questions about how we think about data privacy and security in a world that's increasingly globalized. Are we really becoming more okay with sharing our data with foreign companies, or are we just not fully grasping the potential risks?
I think there's a lot of truth to both of those points. We're navigating this complex digital landscape where, information flows across borders so easily, and it forces us to think critically about who we trust with our data and what implications that has, in a world where different countries have different laws and ethical frameworks.
Yeah, it's a lot to wrap your head around. And honestly, it can feel pretty unsettling not knowing who might be using your data or for what purpose.
Yeah, and it's a valid concern. It underscores the need for greater transparency and control over, how our data is being collected, used, and shared, especially by companies that are based in countries with, different legal and ethical standards than our own. We need to be, having more informed conversations about this and demanding greater accountability from the companies that we entrust with our information.
It feels like we're at this crossroads. Do we try to control these platforms, or do we just accept that the internet is kind of like this global Wild West where anything goes? It's a tough question, and it feels like the stakes are pretty high.
Yeah, it's definitely not an easy question to answer, but one thing is clear: the current approach, which seems to focus on banning individual apps, isn't a sustainable solution in the long run.
Because another one will just pop up in its place.
Yeah.
Like it's almost impossible to control in this interconnected world.
Yeah, exactly. It's like playing whack-a-mole. As soon as you get rid of one, another one pops up. We need a more, comprehensive framework that actually addresses the core issues here, data privacy, security, and international relations in this digital age. We need to be thinking about, global standards and cooperative approaches, not just these reactive bans.
That makes sense, but that also just sounds incredibly complicated to put into practice. Like, how do you even begin to regulate something as vast and as constantly changing as the internet? It's kind of overwhelming to even think about.
It's a massive challenge, absolutely, but it's a conversation we need to be having. We can't just ignore it and hope it goes away. The implications for our individual rights and for the future of the internet they're too important. We need to be, demanding more from our policymakers and pushing for solutions that protect our privacy in this increasingly complex digital world.
So no easy answers here. It sounds like we're all kind of just figuring this out as we go along. But this RedNote situation it's a great example, though, of how user behavior can just be totally unpredictable.
Absolutely. It shows how quickly things can shift and how much, people are willing to adapt and embrace new platforms, even when there are, these concerns.
And it highlights how the lines between national boundaries and online communities are just becoming, increasingly blurred. We're living in this new era of interconnectedness where the opportunities are incredible, but the risks are very real as well.
You're right. I mean, it brings so much potential for positive exchange and understanding, but it also brings, challenges, especially when it comes to navigating these issues of data privacy and national security, in this globalized world.
So what's next? It's hard to predict what will happen with RedNote. Will it become, the next big social media sensation? Or will it face the same fate as TikTok? What are your thoughts?
It's hard to say for sure. I mean, it could go either way, but one thing's for certain, the conversations around data privacy, cultural exchange, and the future of social media are only going to get, more important and more complex.
It feels like we're just at the beginning of this story, and there's a lot left to unfold.
Yeah.
But it's definitely a story worth paying attention to.
Absolutely. And we'll be here to help you make sense of it all, every step of the way.
That's right. We're all in this together, trying to navigate this new world. So today we've explored this unexpected shift from TikTok to RedNote and what it might mean for the future of social media. We've discussed the anxieties around data privacy, the surprising potential for cultural exchange, and the challenges of regulating these platforms in a globalized world. It's a lot to take in, and there are definitely more questions than answers right now. But hopefully, this deep dive has given you some new perspectives and maybe even some things to think about on your own.
Yeah, it's all about, asking the right questions and having these open conversations. The more we understand these complex issues, the better equipped we'll be to navigate them and make informed choices in this digital age.
Yeah, it really does feel like a turning point.
Yeah.
Like the choices we're making now, both individually and as a society, are really going to impact like the future of social media and maybe even the internet as a whole, which is exciting, but also, I don't know, a little bit scary.
Yeah, for sure. It's a time of transition, and that always comes with risk and opportunity. One question I keep coming back to is will this whole migration to RedNote and the potential ban on TikTok, will that force American social media companies to rethink how they approach data privacy?
That's a great question. I mean, if users are showing that they're willing to embrace these foreign platforms, maybe it's a sign that American companies need to step up their game. What do you think that might look like?
Yeah, I mean, it might mean offering users more transparency about how their data is being used, giving them greater control over their own information, or maybe even developing entirely new features, and functionalities that can compete with platforms like TikTok and RedNote.
It's almost like they need to prove themselves to users again, regain that trust that's been kind of eroded by, all the controversies and scandals.
Exactly. They need to demonstrate that they understand users' concerns, It's not enough to just say, we take data privacy seriously anymore. They need to show it through, concrete actions and policies.
So it would be really interesting to see how the industry responds to this challenge. Like, will they innovate and adapt, or will they, continue to lose ground to these foreign competitors?
Yeah, only time will tell, but one thing is for sure, this is a story that's far from over.
And we'll be here to keep unpacking it all with you, as it all unfolds.
Absolutely. The unseen wisdom is all about exploring these complex issues together.
And on that note, I think we've given you a lot to ponder today. This whole RedNote phenomenon raises so many questions about, data privacy, cultural exchange, and the future of social media. And there are definitely no easy answers. I mean, the situation is evolving so rapidly.
It is, but sometimes just asking the right questions is the first step towards finding solutions.
So true. And before we wrap up, I want to leave you with one final thought-provoking question to kind of mull over. So what do you think? Will RedNote ultimately become this force for positive change in the world by fostering these cross-cultural connections, or will it end up facing the same scrutiny and potential ban as TikTok? I mean, it's almost impossible to predict, right?
Yeah, it's really hard to say, but what's important is that we stay engaged, we keep asking those tough questions, and remain open to the possibilities and the challenges that this new digital world presents.
Beautifully said. So until next time, keep those minds open, stay curious, and let us know your thoughts on this whole RedNote situation down in the comments below. We'd love to hear what you think.
Yeah, we would, because after all, this is about exploring these complex issues together, and your insights are valuable.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Until next time.